Now that we've looked at the pros and cons of democracy, it's time to look at those political systems that reject the ideas of liberalism. So how can dictatorships justify the rejection of liberal ideas, especially as liberal ideas are spreading around the world? Well, let's look at the downsides of liberalism. Individualism creates a selfish society and ignores the natural need for belonging to something. Ideas like freedom of speech and pluralism also make it tough to create a unified society. That can be seen in Canada's struggle to find our identity. We can see society trying to create unity when we encourage things like team pride, which is really irrational support for the home team and hatred for your opponents. Look at the difference between these two parades. Can you see a high level of order? Liberalism fails to address the need for order and tradition. Think back to the ideas of Burke, who saw the chaos created by the French Revolution. You can see that issue in your own life when people say they long for the good old days when children were more obedient. Dictators also point out that liberal societies define freedom differently than dictatorships. For example, in a communist society, freedom comes from the government creating security, as the competition created by capitalism creates fear. Our Canadian liberal society sees the need for individual choices, in addition to some government controls and support. So what exactly are the justifications to turn to a dictatorship? Number one, the goals of the state are above selfish individual objectives. Therefore, the collective welfare of the state must always come before the privileges of the individual. Think about it. How much more successful could our country be if we focused on collective interests? Second, only certain people are sufficiently intelligent and energetic to rule. Let's face it, there's some real idiots out there that get the chance to rule in a democracy. Why not find the best and the brightest in our country and ask them to govern us? And number three, unless people's beliefs and actions are strictly controlled, social organization will break down. We believe that pretty strongly here in school. We're going to tell you where to sit, when to go to class, what you're going to learn, even if you can go to the bathroom. Why? Because if we didn't, we believe school would be a madhouse. So just like in a direct democracy, there's key concepts that help us to identify a dictatorial regime. It's usually based on the assumption that only the elite have anything useful to contribute. People are unequal and may not compete with their rulers. The elite will make all public decisions. Why would you want majority rule if it's likely that majority of your people are, well, beneath you? And there's no respect for the political rights of individuals and groups that are not part of the elite. Therefore, there's no place for freedom of speech and assembly or for political and legal equality. The elite might let you think you have a voice just to keep you happy, but they're not really listening to what you have to say. Not all dictatorships are the same, so here's a few ways we can classify them. There's the autocracy, which is ruled by one person, for example, Henry VIII. That's usually what we think of when we talk about dictators like Hitler and Stalin. There's a junta, which is a military dictatorship. This often occurs when the military leader who helped someone get into power wants the power for themselves now. There's oligarchies, which is ruled by a group. For example, the Taliban when they ruled the majority of Afghanistan. And then there's majority tyranny, which is ruled by majority without respect for minority rights. In other words, democracy not working properly. We saw this in the United States prior to the Civil Rights Movement and South Africa with apartheid, although we actually refer to that as minority tyranny. So remember those 8 techniques of representative democracy? Well, I've created a list of 5 key techniques to have a successful dictatorship. Probably the most obvious one is force. There's a drawback though. It's very expensive in terms of time, personnel, other resources, and it can create a new opposition if you push too hard. Indoctrination and propaganda are especially effective in the educational system. You've got to convince the people that what you're doing is in their best interest. Direction of popular discontent is a fancy way of explaining how leaders will build up hatred against real or imagined enemies to divert attention away from things the government might not be doing right. We often refer to this as scapegoating. Then there's controlled participation. That's when people are given the appearance of having a democracy and having a voice in government, but they really don't. There's also the idea of tokenism, where you give a fairly high office to a member of the opposition party to claim you're democratic, but then you don't listen to that person or give them any power. And finally, there's vision. You need to give your people a view of what your government can accomplish and what you can do to make the nation a utopia. China is a great example of this. It's been shown that they're behind protest rallies that promote their vision, like increasing protests against Japanese claims to islands that the Japanese feel belong to them. By reminding the people of atrocities committed when Japan occupied areas like Manchuria, the Chinese can promote their vision while also creating a scapegoat for the people to vent their anger against. They have over 10 government agencies to watch the people and control their access to information, costing them billions of dollars every year. Hundreds of people are assigned to monitor the internet for such subversive and banned words like Ferrari and liver cancer. And private companies like Google are expected to monitor their users, otherwise they could get shut down. Many religious groups are banned on the basis that they're a cult. They detain tens of thousands of people for independent thinking and put them into re-education camps. While the economy is becoming more capitalistic, the local government officials are often corrupt due to the lack of effective rule of law. The government justifies all of this by pointing out that they are a nation of over 1 billion people, and if they're not controlled, chaos could break out and the great nation could fall apart. The last thing I want to do is distinguish between a dictatorship and a totalitarian regime. All totalitarian regimes are dictatorships, but not all dictatorships are totalitarian. You can have what's called a benevolent dictatorship, where the leader of the country isn't elected but still rules with consideration for the needs and wants of the people, whereas a totalitarian dictatorship is the type of dictator we usually think of, a megalomaniac who wants to control all aspects of society in order to maintain their control. It's usually based on the theories of Carlyle, Nietzsche, even Hitler, the great man theory, the man of destiny. Think about it. If we could convince the best people to rule the country instead of these yokels who are willing to enter themselves into a popularity contest we call elections, wouldn't that be a better way to run the country? So what are the basic characteristics that help us to identify whether or not a nation is totalitarian? Well, it has an official plan that covers all aspects of human existence. That includes things like who you can marry, what job you can have, even whether your life is protected. We saw this under the Nuremberg laws in Germany and the apartheid laws in South Africa. There's a single mass party, usually under one leader. Totalitarian dictators are confident that they're the best man to do the job, so why bother with opposition voices? The government has a monopoly of police and weapons. You're not going to maintain that level of power unless the military is backing you. And remember, a dictator's just one person or a small group. It's the weapons that make them more powerful than the citizens. The party controls all means of mass communication. You've got to convince your people that you are the best and that their lives are better because of you. And there's a tight control of the economy, because how are you going to pay for all that military force and propaganda unless you have the cash? An example of this would be the miraculous turnaround in the German economy that was boosted by government programs like the building of the Volkswagen and the development of MIFO bills, but we'll talk about all that later. Okay, I'll admit it, we're pretty familiar with the downsides of dictatorships. The Holocaust, the Ukrainian famine, the killing fields of Cambodia, the torture chambers of Saddam Hussein. So really, can I say there's pros to a dictatorship? Well, of course. Things get done so much faster in a dictatorship. You don't have those pesky legislative debates to deal with. When I went to Cuba in the 1990s, I was so surprised at how calmly the tour guide explained that the legislative building we were driving by on the tour bus was now a museum because they had no need for it, since Castro made all the decisions. Think about the economic growth that occurred under Stalin in the USSR and Germany under Hitler. While they approached the economy in different ways, they were able to do phenomenal things to improve the lives of our citizens. Notice I said citizens, not all the people living in the country. And while Iraq had issues under Saddam Hussein, at least things were fairly organized. Now that we've introduced democracy to Iraq, there are parliamentary stalemates, and little is being done to rebuild the country. Many people complain that while they lived in fear under Hussein, at least the electricity worked. And under Tito, Yugoslavia prospered. He might have repressed freedom of speech and cultural expression, but when he died and the new leader Milosevic encouraged ethnic expression, the country fell into a civil war that led to the worst genocide since the Nazi Holocaust in Europe. Democracy is slow and messy. Then again, democracy doesn't have torture chambers for political opponents.